maybe we'll just ignore it. Okay, so Philip Aries stated that the chasm between discussion of death in books, which is still prolific, and it is, even now, there's a great number of books being written about death and dying, and actual death, which is shameful and not to be talked about, is one of the strange but significant sign of our times. And again, working in a large metropolitan hospital and working with residents and doctors and families every day, I see this. People are clearly dying, yet woefully few numbers of those people are actually talking about the fact that they are dying. So prior to the 14th century, though, things were vastly different. It used to be understood and accepted that a man or woman or even a small child knew when he was dying. Whether they became spontaneously aware of that fact or whether they had to be told, it was reasonable that people would understand and know when they were dying and accept that role, right? In the olden days, prior to the 14th century, if you had a sudden death, that was seen as a horrible thing. People wanted to be able to experience their deaths in order to do a significant number of tasks that were considered the work of dying, right? So if something happened like an accident where someone died quickly, they were not able to achieve those things, and they didn't like it because there were lots of roles and duties of people that the dying person had. And as is pictured here, when you knew you were dying, and people generally did know they were dying, deaths weren't quick, they were somewhat more lingering, but you would call people forth to come around your bedside, and you would do those things that people need to do, the giving and receiving of forgiveness, stating apologies, sharing your wealth and passing words of wisdom down and your belongings down. People would gather around, right? Then there was a ceremony. And yes, there may be doctors and there may be priests, but they were only those were only a couple of the different roles. The leading role went to the dying man himself. Even if it was a small child, they would still be elevated to that role of the dying and be able to have the role of calling people forth. They really presided over the affair with hardly a misstep because they knew how to conduct themselves, having previously witnessed so many similar scenes, right? So it was kind of an accepted sort of process, and people knew what their role was and how to do it. People were born in public in individual homes, and people also died in public in their individual homes. Not as sterile as it is nowadays in hospitals behind closed doors or intensive care units where only 2 people could visit at a time for 10 minutes, right? It used to be that when people passed a priest in the street, they knew if he was going to a dying person's home, and they also went in order to pay respect, right? So the approach of death in earlier times transformed a dying man's room into sort of a public place. So the concept of a man will die alone can only be understood in the context of, yes, you are the only one going into death, but you are doing it in a very public way, or at least that's how it used to be. Today, though, nothing or very little remains of the sense that everyone has or should have of their own impending death, right? Or that moment of death. What used to be appreciated is now hidden. What used to be solemn is now avoided. That public admission of my status is changed as a dying person, right? I ought to be granted things that other people aren't granted and treated in some special ways and allowed some status that others don't. Currently, about 80% of deaths still happen in hospitals, despite the fact that most people say this is not where they would choose to die if they were given their choice. Very, very often still people are, as you see in this picture, hooked up to a variety of machines, which oftentimes distance you from being able to be close to your family at that moment, or if they're bedside with a lot of machines in between them. So as hospital dying moved out of private out of private homes and behind closed doors. There was a significant change in how the families also then experience death and to the emotional center of the family in our world, right? So Aries says that family, having no longer been able to tolerate the blow it had to deal a loved one, right? That was then moved to the doctors. The doctors were doing that, and to the blow it had to deal itself, bringing death closer, making it more certain, is an illusion. So when dying moved to hospitals, then kind of that talking about it stopped or was put away. And also people had less a sense with when you're hooked up on machines when dying was actually occurring. One of the toughest things to deal with, and if you've seen the national news recently, you heard about the teenage boy at the University of Michigan Children's Hospital who was brain dead and his mother was having a difficult time accepting it, right? Part of that difficulty is because someone who is sedated and on a ventilator looks exactly the same as someone who is brain dead and on a ventilator, right? So you don't look any different, and it's hard for people to accept that and understand it. What is dead? He looks the same as he looked for the last 2 weeks here. The idea of that death changing was really, I think, acutely demonstrated, even if you look in literature, in The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy. And if you look at Tolstoy's writings, even with one individual author, in the space of 30 years, you can see it kind of mirrored what was going on in society. And again, this is in the late 1800s, and he says not so much because of the real conquest made by medicine or as a result of that medicine. In the mind of the sick man, death had been replaced by illness, right? So the substitution first appeared in the 19th century when the dying peasant in Tolstoy's The Three Deaths was asked where he hurt. He replied, "I hurt all over, death is here." That's what it is. Again, an honest exclamation about dying. But if you think not even 30 years later, when Ivan Ilyich was dying, the conversation he overheard between the physician and his wife really should have left no doubt that he was dying, yet he still continues to think about this floating kidney and an infected appendix, right? And those things certainly are curable. So
We lost your voice.
now considered a chronic illness for many types of cancer, at least until the final stages. But it's becoming increasingly difficult to know, even with something like that, when is it that final stage, right? Because there's always more chemotherapy agents, there's always more things. So the idea of dying has been really changed to illness. So you can be sick or ailing for a long time. Oftentimes now, when it comes to those illnesses that are increasing, I always say we must lead our doctors, the doctor sitting bedside, and they always had something else that they want to share with you, that they want to try, another treatment, something that might work down the road, another option. So oftentimes it ends up being the patients, again, trying to take back some of that control of their living, their life, and of their dying by saying, you know what, I'm tired. I'm ready to end this. I'm wanting hospice care. So I always say, remember Dr. Ruth, talking about sex won't get you pregnant, and talking about death won't kill you. We need to do this, I think, much more often earlier and share our views of what we want. Hospice time still oftentimes comes too little too late. Most patients are referred for hospice care in their final week of life. In your final week of life, you oftentimes by that point are too sick, too weak, and too frail to do that traditional work of dying, the calling forth, the giving and receiving of forgiveness, and having those conversations that you want your family and loved ones to be able to carry down. A week doesn't give you enough time, and you're oftentimes too sick at that point to do it. The concept of hospice is to say within the last 6 months of life, right? Note when you're diagnosed with a terminal illness so that you can start preparing and do some of those things. We're not doing a very good job of this. It's one of the things I continually try to promote. Hospice helps you live well while dying. That concept isn't really well explained, and it's not acted out as often as it could be. Death, again, this is from Philip E. Aries. Death used to be a tragedy, often comic, acted out for the benefit of a man who is about to die, people trotting up to his bedside, right? Today, death is a comedy. It's always tragic, though, acted out for a benefit of a man who does not know he is about to die. And I think in those comic actors, it's not always just the family members who are trying not to talk about someone dying when clearly they are dying, but it's also the medical teams. There are 4 common death trajectories, and I want to say to you that if you realize which death trajectory you are likely to have, it will help you in achieving the sort of death that you say you want to have. In the top corner, I don't know if you can see me pointing here, this death, sudden death, still we don't have a lot of control over. If you look on this axis, it's your functioning level, right? So you're high functioning and you go along until the point you die. Here's where you're hit by the bus. This is time, and you're hit by the bus and you die instantly. There's no really control there. That hasn't changed very much over time. If you think about terminal illness, though, right, here's where we are. Even, like I said, terminal illness has become a chronic illness of sorts that you may be diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, but you're still functioning really, really, really high and getting treatment, and that could continue until it's no longer working, and then you have a dramatic and quick decline. Oftentimes for patients with terminal illnesses, they'll do really well until like the final 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks to death. So relatively quick death curve. Here's where most of us will end up over time in these bottom 2, right? These are chronic illnesses. It says organ failure, but I want you to think about all those chronic illnesses like COPD, which is a respiratory failure, CHF, congestive heart failure, diabetes. Think of those sort of illnesses as those chronic illnesses where your functioning may go down some, you're admitted to the hospital, something acute happens, you're in the hospital for a while, you have pneumonia, you get out of the hospital, you go back up, you're feeling better, time continues, you may be admitted to the hospital again for a longer time, something else happens, you get out of the hospital, you climb back up, you go along, you're slowly declining. And if you look at this up and down, the thing to note is that each one of these peaks, although you're able to recover, you don't recover quite where you were before. You can't get quite as high as you were the last time. So this is what we see most commonly as people age through their life. They continue to have their frailty increasing. So you may be living at home here, then you may move into assisted living with more help. Then you may end up in a nursing home because you need help with everything. You see that sort of thing. This last box that we're going to talk about, this is generally frailty, specifically dementing illnesses in dementia. And we know that persons, there's such an increase in the number of persons who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's or other dementing illnesses. In this situation, someone has low functioning, they're needing assistance, and this low functioning just barely dwindles and dwindles, but it could go out over a very, very long time until someone ends up with their dying. So those 4 common death trajectories are important to think about in your planning, right? They can affect obligations, especially the chronic illness one, which is the one that most people will be in, because you don't know which peak will be your last or which of those valleys will in fact be your death, right? So that is a concern. The second one, the one that I spoke to you about regarding dementia, is a specific concern which we call precedent autonomy, right? And so the concerns are who to really listen to, the current John who's demented but standing in front of you, or the former John who didn't want anything done, right? So I use the example of a pacemaker. Someone may state appropriately in their advance directive that if I develop a dementing illness, I would not like any life-prolonging medical devices, right? Which would be something like a pacemaker, saying if I am demented, I wouldn't want to have a pacemaker because it would prolong my suffering and my dying. It would draw out that long, really low line. So if you put that in your advance directive, you would want people, you think, to honor your wishes and follow that out. But think 25 years down the road, and you are in fact the demented John who's living in a nursing home, getting a lot of help, still ambulating around. He doesn't know where he is, but he's ambulating around, really happily demented, and having heart palpitations. And so then, hang on, sorry, my phone was ringing. Then happy demented John has heart palpitations, and they say, oh, well, we can fix that, John. We'll put a pacemaker in you. And the doctor's talking to you with your daughter, says, you know, John, would you like us? You know, we just put a little pacemaker in. It's not that big a surgery, and it's going to keep your ticker going really good for a long time. And John's going, well, okay, that sounds all right. It's not going to hurt, is it? Nope. So then John's daughter is really stuck there. What do? You know, currently dad is demented, but it's not going to hurt him. Who do we listen to about that, right? So the idea of precedent autonomy, and that's certainly something that you need to think about and have a discussion with while you still have the capacity to do so with your loved ones. What would your true wishes be in those situations, right? And maybe it's, as long as I'm seeming happy, go ahead and do it. Maybe it's, no matter how happy I seem, I don't want to have something like that done, right? But it's something you need to think about. Again, a little comic break, which I hate comic breaks when I can't hear anybody laughing. This better be important. I'm in the middle of a conference call. Again, we never know when death is going to come for us, so we need to have these conversations. And I think it's little truths about dying. And, you know, again, we accepted that we're all going to die. At the time of death, though, 3/4 of us are non-ambulatory, a third are incontinent, and 40%, and I would be willing to bet this book was written 20 years ago, I would say higher than 40% now are cognitively impaired at the time of death. So you can't wait necessarily to have these conversations. It's important to do it early. This is by Jeff Malpas. I'm a philosopher, and I like this because we all say, of course, that we'd rather die surrounded by friends and family. But when we state that, what we really wish for is something else, more unspoken, that we should die in a decent manner, preferably well-dressed, makeup unsmeared, face undistorted by pain or unbroken by violence, still pink and flushed and untainted by anything quite so as offensive as blood. And if you're from the South, I would say with your lips on, right? Sadly, most of us don't get that. We get this. In an intensive care unit, intubated with more IV bags and machines taking over for all of our functions. So how do you get the death you want? You need to think, and I mean really think, what it would be. Acknowledge the potential trajectories and which one is likely to happen for you. Clearly identify some keystone markers in advance. Things like, would I want to have a pacemaker if my heart started failing? Would I want to go on dialysis if my kidneys failed? Would I want to be on a ventilator if my lungs were to fail? Would I want IV antibiotics if I had Alzheimer's, meaning my brain was failing, right? Think about some of these things and then make them clear in your advance directives, but don't just write it down. You need to share them. And then you need to talk with your family about your wishes. In the end, others will likely be making those decisions for you, so they really are only wishes. Of course, I have told my family, I will haunt you forever if you don't do what I say, because I'm really controlling. But they are only wishes, but you need to make sure they know. Realize that you likely will need to start accepting less care earlier than you think in order to get the death that you say you want. When you're talking with your doctors, ask to hear about all options, including the option of doing nothing. And this is so important. Oftentimes what patients don't hear from their doctors is that average life expectancy for most terminal illnesses is about equivalent with or without treatment. Yes, I said that, right? Average life expectancy for stage 4 lung cancer is 18 months with or without treatment, right? So you need to think about those things and always ask to hear your options. Encourage patients, your patients, and encourage yourself to make demands on families and friends. Go ahead, go back to the old days, right? Let them know it's important. Yes, I want you to come see me. I'm sorry you live in California and I live in New York. I'm dying. I need to see you. Go ahead, make those demands. Use your words. People aren't going to know if you don't share them, if you don't share your mind with them. So let them know what you want. If you're a little bit timid and you think I'm not going to be able to say that, that's okay. Write it down. Send an email. Say, I really would like you to read this, and then we can talk about it later. Make sure they know somehow what's important to you and what you want. Have some real conversations. Share your fears, your concerns, your hopes. You might be pleasantly surprised that it's easier than you think once you get started. Ask for help. After all, we're only human and we only do this once, right? This lady, I love, she used her words, she asked for what she wanted. She was in a nursing center, she realized she wasn't gonna get out. This is in England. This is her horse. She goes, what I really want is to see my horse again. You tell people what you want, it's amazing. People will move mountains to try and help you achieve it. And she did achieve it. She was able to see her horse. Okay, so now you've died. We're going to talk really quickly about some funeral options. Hopefully you guys know this stuff. I'd just like to preface it again quickly. Walmart, yes, we all know about the FTC funeral rule that states you can make, purchase, or buy your casket anywhere and have them sent to your funeral home of choice, and they are required by law to allow the use. We also know that if you walk into the casket room, where they have all the beautiful caskets displayed for you, that you are going to end up paying 3 to 5 times as much than if you order them online at Walmart or Costco, right? So you don't have to do it. Most of them can be shipped within 24 to 48 hours nationwide. Also, if you want to make your own pine box in your wood shop and tell your grandchildren, this is my casket, when I die, I want to be put in it, you have every right to do that too. Okay. This I like. It talks about green burials, and more places are really being able to have green burials or have a green burial section of their own cemetery. If you see this, you can see there's all the benefits of having man-made products that are easier to degrade into the earth rather than leaving metals and poisons from embalming in the earth. I like the fact that you can see that it is only 3.5 feet. You don't have to dig down to 5 or 6 feet if you're having a natural burial. And then there's any number of beautiful wicker caskets, bamboo caskets, cardboard caskets, even the cardboard boxes that people are put in, and they allow like grandchildren to color on them, to write messages to send to someone. I love all of these options. I also love Final Footprint. My friend Janie Hillhouse in California imports woven wicker caskets from Africa, and they are beautiful. If you haven't ever looked at the Final Footprint website, I encourage you to do so because those are beautiful. Cremation we all know about, although I don't know why you would pay to have a wooden casket with metal handles on it go into your crematorium. But what I want to point out about cremation is this right down here in the bottom right hand corner. Those are metal hips, shoulders, other joints, knees, spines, all of these. How many of you know someone that's had a titanium hip, right? These precious metals, when you have cremation, they are all thrown into a box and they are recycled. Most people don't know that this occurs, and these are recyclable metals that crematories are paid, you know, they turn it in and they get money. I mean, in Michigan, we get 10 cents a can, but it's a lot more than 10 cents for your titanium hip, which is going to be melted down and used again. Good crematoriums now will offer you, if you know something like that, they will offer to allow you to have them donated to a number of different charities. So ask about that. That's something most people don't know. They don't know to ask about it, right? So urn usable. Although many urns are available for purchase, you can buy them online. Again, a lot cheaper than buying them from a funeral home. But you can also use a cherished container that you already own. Again, I use the example of Grandma Tilly, known for her homemade cookies and her Minnie Mouse cookie jar. Maybe that's the perfect place for her, right? So it's for you. Again, think about what's important for you and what you might like. We gave Ruth Bennett, our FCA president, a double urn when she was stepping down from the national board. And, you know, hopefully she's a long, long way from needing to use it, but we thought it was a perfect gift for her, and we inscribed it with some funny things. So alkaline hydrolysis, another green option for your final body disposal. Again, not necessarily a funeral, but your final body disposal. This was an early alkaline hydrolysis machine on the left. This is what comes out in the end, a bag of remains that's about the same as you would end up with in cremation, but again, it's a lot greener. It's 95% water. More eco-friendly than even cremation, which is more eco-friendly than putting poisons in your body and putting you in a metal casket and putting you in a ground, right? So you end up with just some sterile water and bone fragments, even though people like to make it a lot scarier than that. Really look at this, it's pretty simple. This is a picture that I only have to show that 8 years ago, only the states in the blue allowed alkaline hydrolysis. This was 8 years ago. There was only 6 states. If you look now, look at all of the states going from in 8 years, where the green is where alkaline hydrolysis is accepted and allowed. The turquoise are ones that are under construction. They're working on it now. And I know Washington has approved it. Again, alkaline hydrolysis, cremation remains are about the same. I just like that slide. So the newest, latest, and greatest, these are all my wonderful friends, Nora and Catherine, to get recomposing done. So recomposing is, I think, the latest and greatest, and it's coming up on the future. It's the right mix of carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen with natural microbial activity, transforming organic material into compost, basically. So how does this work? This here shows our first rendering of what we thought recomposing would look like. And you can see these holes here. It's oxygen, alfalfa, and wood chips fill up this whole container. Your body starts off at the top. The oxygen helps with the decomposing. It's basically composting. If anybody has ever grown up on a farm and you know what happens when cows or horses would die, kind of it's that same thing, right? The alfalfa and the wood chips help that process go quicker. If you've ever seen in the Smoky Mountains, they're smoky because of the composting and the heavy berm and wood stuff that's going around. So it's kind of that thing. This is what we thought it would look like when Katrina started this. And she gave her presentation at our, let me think, I think it was our Minnesota FCA convention about 6 years ago. This is a newer rendering what recomposing will look like. These are individual pods there. So each person would be individually recomposed. So I think that's pretty exciting. So the important thing is there are many options for your final body disposal, and it's important for you getting the send-off you want to think about what it would be, what those options are, and again, really talk to your family about it. I encourage you to complete a packet, the FCA booklet of Before I Go, You Should Know. That's a wonderful resource to put everything down, or any other packet that you want to complete with all the information that you'll need. Again, we always encourage pre-plan, pre-talk, decide, make all those decisions, but don't prepay because you never know where you'll be. It breaks my heart every time I hear about someone taking their dream trip mine's to Greece or Italy or wherever, somewhere out of the country. Something horribly unfortunate happens and they die. Well, but you know what? Sally prepaid for her funeral back in Toledo. Well, if she dies on her dream vacation in Greece, what a wonderful way to go. But she's not going to be able to utilize her prepaid funeral in Toledo, right? And you don't get your money back. Once you give them your money, they keep it. So pre-plan, don't prepay. If you need to have money set aside, that's fine. Have a pay upon death certificate and name someone with just the amount of funds that you think that they would need to accomplish the body disposal that you would want. So it's payable upon your death to them for that. Again, this is our Before I Go You Should Know planner. It's available for $15 in paper from our national website or $9.99 for a digital download. Okay, and you guys are real savvy if we're doing all this digitally, so there's not really any good reason not to get your wishes written down. Again, I gave my dad one for Christmas a few years ago, so it's a great stocking stuffer. Not a usual stocking stuffer, but it's a great stocking stuffer. Now I want to share with you, lastly, before I end, my time is coming short, some of the stuff that National's been up to. We've been increasingly doing national surveys and getting more numbers to help support us in our legislative efforts. Less than 1 in 4 funeral homes post their prices online. If you've been involved with National at all, you know that we are working very hard to get them to update the funeral rule and include online prices. So we've been doing the work and taking also information from all of our affiliates who are doing the work and doing funeral price surveys to find out kind of where we're standing. And it is about as bad as what we thought. Less than 1 in 4 funeral homes post their prices online. 23% of funeral homes don't include the cost of cremation in their advertised cremation price. Yes, you heard me correctly. That's a question that we ask when we do our funeral home surveys for all our local ones. So this is your price for your cremation. And then if you look, there may be a different price for the cost of cremation. So they're giving you routine services of funeral home and staff for their cremation price, and then you're paying additionally on top of that for cremation. You have to look very closely and ask specific questions. Corporate funeral homes, we won't mention the double SCI. Corporate funeral homes don't disclose prices, are 30 to 50% more expensive than independents, right? So we know some of these things, so we're sharing this information. FCA National has been protecting your right not to consume. And in many states, we've been doing work with other affiliates, lawsuits that overturn laws in Tennessee barring retail or artesian casket sales. There were people working in Appalachia that were selling their caskets, and then the funeral home industry started coming in and saying, no, we only want corporate sellers, right? So you couldn't have your artesian casket. That funeral rule now says you could make your own in your garage, as we talked about, right? 2009, worked with Indian tribes to reverse laws in Utah. We've also reversed laws in Minnesota, which required funeral directors and embalming for public viewing. Many people think that you have to be embalmed for a public viewing. That is merely, most cases, funeral home practices. They say, we only allow open casket funerals if you're embalmed. You really, I mean, I've seen a lot of dead bodies. They just look dead, right? When they're embalmed, they look a little more Barbie and plasticky, but they're still dead. They just have more poisons in their body, right? FCA staff has written dozens of letters and intervened on behalf of home funeral families who've been thwarted by state officials. Most state officials honestly don't even know their state laws. More and more states are starting to sneak laws into their legislature requiring a licensed funeral director anytime there is a funeral. Well, you know what? 150 years ago, we didn't have licensed funeral directors in our homes when somebody died. We just took care of our dead at home, and it worked well. It works well all across the globe. Most parts of the world don't have funeral homes. They wrap bodies in a shroud and place them in the earth and say whatever words or prayers that they want to have done. The American public has really perversed our rights and expectations about taking care of our own dead. And FCA is supporting a lot of the home funeral people and continuing to do what they want. The book, Restoring Families' Rights to Choose, was written with the National Home Funeral Alliance, and it's now being translated into Spanish. In 2018, we are continuing to work with the Federal Trade Commission to amend the rules to require all funeral homes that have a website to disclose itemized costs online. We started this past year, again, looking at California is one state. It's the only one to pass a law requiring any kind of internet price disclosures for funerals. So it's been really useful as a case study for what we are proposing to have done nationally. But based only on what we found in California, we found that 44% of the funeral homes price list You can see more of this work if you go to that link down there, consumerfederation.org/funerals. We have been working with them for the past couple of years, and I think it's been a really good alliance for Funeral Consumers Alliance. So let us know how we can help you. At National, I think people, sometimes you feel like you're just out there on your own doing what you need to do in your local FCA affiliate, but let us know what you're doing. Let us know how we can help you. The National Board really does want to be involved and help you guys as much as we can, and we're really interested in what things you guys are doing. In Texas, Jim, oh, I'm blanking on his last name. Their state FCA did a tremendous job in 2018 when the funeral directors there were proposing a law. There was a Senate bill that mandated that all fetal tissue less than 20 weeks old resulting from abortion or miscarriage had to have a funeral-directed funeral, right, for burial rights. FCA's role was unique and beneficial because they were the only ones who didn't align with either pro-birth or pro-life. We were not aligned with the funeral industry and all. The funeral industry, of course, was thrilled with this bill because it would mandate that there were licensed funeral directors to have funerals for all fetal remains. So we played a huge role in Texas in getting this another state bill reversed. So we do a lot. Sometimes people go, why should I give money to both my local and my national FCA when I'm thinking about my donations? It's important because we do work all across the nation, and national will be there to support you when you need it. We want you to support national as well. So I say, please support both your local FCA and your national FCA when we request. It doesn't have to be big, you know. Just like you, we do amazing things with $100, right? We stretch it really, really far. If ever you're concerned, we have our budget posted on our national website, and it's always there, and it's always going to be there. So if you want to know where the money goes, it's right there to look at, right? Thank you very much for allowing me to give you this presentation. If you have questions, I think we have a few minutes left for that, and I've gotten you pretty close to back on time.